Hi everybody, my name is Greg Henniger. I'm a member of the community team here at Amazon Games, and we've been scouring the internet, listening to your feedback, reading the forums, looking on social media, Reddit, all of these places, and we decided it was time for a developer update video. So to help me do that, I'm going to have a host of a lot of the New World developers, but first and foremost, I have Scott Lane, the game director, and Rich Lawrence, the studio head here at the Irvine studio.
Hey, before we start, I just wanted to call out the players and say thank you. The engagement from the player base has been humbling, and it's really helped us guide where we're going. So I just want to say how much we appreciate the feedback and how constructive it's been. And we like partnering with the players a lot. So we're excited. Today is in response to the players have been asking us, hey, we want to know more about where you're going. We want to go deep on some of these topics. So today is all about that. It's responding to that.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and right at the top, something that a lot of players are talking about right now, they're very concerned about, and they would like a little bit more information. As we've been updating the game recently with our, game updates and patches, there seems to be an introduction of more new issues while we're trying to fix other game issues. Can you talk a little bit about how we're going to work to prevent some of that?
Yeah, that has been a problem. We've introduced some new issues with some of the patches we've made. We've done 19 patches since release, which is kind of a blistering pace. What we've been trying to do is balance new features as much as we can in with our fixes. And what we've discovered is that we have a rate limit, we're going too fast, honestly. And so we're going to focus a lot on better testing, longer testing, making sure that we've got something fully ready for release. It's not like we weren't doing that before, but we've learned some things that were emergent that surprised us. And given that, we're going to change our process. We're going to focus on a few less features, but deeper in terms of how we express them, make those features bigger and deliver them to players with less bugs. That's going to be the desired outcome. That's our focus, actually.
Yeah, can I add on to that just a little?
Yeah, of course.
So with our weeklies, in general, you want to fix 8 to 10, maybe even 15 things a week, problems, and you want to make them really targeted. But when we were watching the game live, we saw problems that were bothering us, and it's like it just hurts in your stomach when you see players struggling with things. So we were trying to get 50, 60 things fixed a week, and that left us, not enough testing, and it was, like Rich said, we were trying to go too fast. We were trying to fix more than we could, and it created more problems than it's worth, and we're learning from that, and we're, and changing our processes, improving every day. So,
yeah. Do you feel like the introduction of the PTR, the public test realm, is going to help in that direction too?
Yeah, absolutely. One, it gives players a great way to see a feature before it's complete, right? And have input on it. And we're looking at creating longer cycles for PTR, so there's more time to do that. Unfortunately, when those features start with a longer cycle, they're going to be really raw when they first come out. But I think players understand that. They get that it's very new at that point. That gives them more time to feedback on it, more time for us to ingest that feedback, figure out what we can do with it, improve the feature based on it. And you'll see us using PTR continuously, basically, going forward for all major new features. Last thing we want to do is surprise people with a new feature that's impactful to gameplay, and they haven't had a chance to give us their expertise in saying, this is good, this is bad, these are the aspects we like, these are the aspects we don't.
Yeah, even further, on the November release, we didn't really have a chance to respond to what the players told us were the problems. On the December release, you're going to see that we actually were able to respond to a significant number, and we're going to, like Rich said, we're going to add even more time for January and going forward.
And so would you say that the best place to provide feedback if you're a player would be the forums or social, or we look at a lot of different places, but where's the best place to get feedback?
It's the forums for sure.
Okay.
We look at Reddit, we look at the forums, we look at other places, we even watch in-game chat. But the team scours the forums daily, and we have internal communication networks that we use. And I would say I see 20 to 30 forum posts shared with specific team members there a day at a minimum, where we're raising awareness of things, getting them added to lists, and that helps drive our priorities.
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but is the team prioritizing bug fixes and polish right now over new content, or?
It's a little of both, but the number one driver of priority is what has the biggest impact on the player. So if we have a serious bug and a serious feature, the bug is probably going to take priority because that is going to impact more players.
Sure.
We have a pretty large team, so we have some features that we feel are really important that we're going to be talking about today. We want to keep people working on those, but not at the expense of a bad experience in live. So live is always our number one driver right now. Mm-hmm. But new features are important too. So it's a balancing act, and we don't have a hard rule. Every bug is more important than every feature, or vice versa. It's really looking at it holistically and then drilling down to this versus this.
That being said, I mean, the takeaway should be we are prioritizing bugs. We try to fix because we consider those larger impact to players. Mm-hmm. Once we deal with those bugs and they aren't larger impact, then we're looking at features. But people should understand that only so many people can be productive in fixing a given bug, right? So if we have a bug as a priority, we put our best people on it. Like we give out every resource it needs. We're not holding back. But many times there'll be people who otherwise wouldn't have anything to do, and they can work on features while others are working on the bugs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there, speaking of things we're working on right now, server merges. Can you talk a little bit about server merges, how they work, how they're going to kind of look to players?
Yeah, the idea with a server merge is, the primary pursuit of a server merge is important to note, which is to give a better play environment to players. We find we have all kinds of indicators, but the number one is just play satisfaction. Players like being on a server that has a wide and diverse audience playing it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the objective with server mergers. What happens with a server merger is there's a host that you're going to, the server that we're moving to, and then one to any number of servers may merge into that server, and all of the players transfer. There are steps taken to make sure that, for instance, companies get compensation if there are changes going to a new server with that. And then you land on the new map, which is the map from the existing host server. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what's interesting is immediately a bunch of wars break out because everyone's like, let's resettle it, which is actually kind of cool. But the number one objective there is make sure there's no loss, nobody loses anything, there's no gold cost or anything to that. Obviously nothing on your character gets lost, nothing reverts, but you just have more people to play with. So more opportunities for PvP, more opportunities for PvE, go into dungeons, you can easier find a group when there's more people on the server. What we target with a merger is not to fill a server completely to capacity, but to make it a very healthy full day cycle. So even at its low ebb, it's easy to, for instance, find a dungeon group. That's our primary motivation, is make it easy for players to find social organization, PvP or PvE, either way.
Okay, great. That all sounds awesome. We're going to continue to talk about new features coming. We're going to talk about mutators were one thing. We're talking about the roadmap. We're going to talk about the vision for New World. So we have a full show coming up, so we hope you stick around. For the next segment, we're going to be talking about the vision and the future of New World. So we have some new people at the table. We have Dave Verifai, who is the creative director, and the art director, Charles Bradbury. So, Scott, I think this is a kind of a big question, right? What is the vision for New World? What are we going to see in the future?
So at the highest level, the vision is that we wanted to create a world where PvP and PvE players wouldn't just coexist, but they'd complement each other. So far, you can see things like our territory mechanics supporting that. Mm-hmm. Although we do have a little work to do there, we still want to figure out a way to give players a way to overthrow tyrants or absent leaders. Uh-huh. But I think one of the big things we should touch on is that between PvP and PvE, we plan on supporting both. We don't have a favorite child in this one. We think both are hugely important to the longevity of New World. We still have a lot of story to tell about. There's a lot more things we want to talk about on Aeternum, more threats, more villains coming through. We still have to close this chapter on the Isabella story. Mm-hmm. We have we want more dynamic things happening in the world. We love that the world, parts of the world feel different every time you come through it. I think that's awesome. We've heard the players loud and clear. They want more variety in AI. They want more variety in questing, more things to do. We're definitely going to lean into that hard. We have these intersecting game systems that live in the sandbox. We want to put more of that into play. We think that's really important. So, and like I said, we want to finish telling this story. There's so much more to uncover on Aeternum that we think is important. And when we think about all this in the long term, it's going to be guided by the players. What are they asking for? What do they want? How are they reacting to new things? So a lot of this is like, I can't give you an exact order, but these are that direction we're pushing the game in over time.
Right. And you're saying you wanted to kind of finish a story that's really the story of Isabella and then tell new stories, or continue the mystery that is Aeternum?
Well, there's a lot of new stories we want to tell, you know,
Yeah.
and we're going to hint on some of those today. We're not going to get specific. We're not ready to talk about them, but there's a lot more interesting people on this world than just Isabella.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll dive into that later with some of the other dev members.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, I think when I think about New World, some of the things that are special to me about it are how players can change the world. Like, people can actually have an impact on the world and change it. And I think that's something we want to continue to foster and build as we continue to grow the vision of the game. That, and like you mentioned, the dynamic events, I think those are big, and we've got some really cool ones with the corrupted breaches, and players can see those dynamically sprouting up. I wouldn't, I could see us adding more of those, and maybe even some that affect PvP in the future, right? Because I think that the world changing each time you play is pretty cool.
Yeah, and you touched on that earlier, the balance between PvP and PvE. I would imagine that is something we're going to continue to invest in moving forward.
Yeah, I think, like Scott said, we don't have a favorite child here, right, Scott? We like them both. And I think we've got really cool content for both sides. Like on the PvE side, we've got more expeditions coming. We have this great winter event that is happening.
Right, the Winter Convergence event.
Winter Convergence, and more of that is coming. And then on the PvP side, right, I think we've got really cool large-scale PvP moments with war. It's like one of our best moments, big and dynamic.
Yeah.
But I think our combat really shines at the small scale also. So I think we want to start supporting that smaller scale in PvP also.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's a lot of community members and players that are excited about that small scale PvP stuff.
Yeah, and I talked a bit, or me and both Dave and I talked a bit about the vision forward. Art has its own vision forward, and I'd love it if Charles would share some of that.
Absolutely. I think we've laid this pretty good foundation. There's a lot of variety to the world. There's all these different enemy groups, the lost and the corrupted and stuff. We want to keep building on that. We have a lot of ideas of like new cultures that can come to the world and sort of spread out across our landscape, and they bring their own culture and look and feel with them. And so new outfits, new architecture for players to explore, new enemy families that players are going to have to deal with. And so I think as we grow Aeternum and like flesh out what this world is, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to like make the world more interesting.
Do you think those new enemy types and new areas are going to be the places where we're going to see like the brand new stuff, or are we going to continue to refresh the zones that people have been playing in already?
I think it's going to be a bit of both. We talk a lot about like this dynamic world, things are changing. I think we want to see stuff in the areas that players are familiar with start to shift and change, but also adding new zones and new areas that players can go to and like find new adventures as well.
Yeah, I think it's just so exciting that we're celebrating these different cultures, and to be able to go over here to this culture because you want to craft something or something unique to them, or go over to this part of the world. It drives this desire to explore the world, and it keeps making it feel different, And to your earlier question, I think it's hugely important that while we are growing the world, this current world is alive. It's changing, and it's going to be different over time.
Right. And we kind of talked about the vision for the future, but in terms of a tangible roadmap, is there anything you can share with us today?
Yeah, we're going to go pretty deep on some of this stuff, so I'll just give you a quick high level, but we just released our first event, and we're in the process of releasing it, which we're really excited about, the Winter Convergence event. We have something coming out in January, Mutators. This is where when you're playing expeditions at the end of the game, they're going to play a little differently, they're going to get a little harder, and they're going to have better rewards the more times you do them. So it's going to create a repeatable loop.
Yeah, we'll deep dive into that later. Yeah.
Really deep dive into that. After that, we want to spend a little time getting rid of some of the bug debt that we've accrued. So we're going to focus on fixing as many bugs. We're going to dive really deep into the balance. We fix balance regularly, weekly and monthly, but we're going to devote February to bugs, balance, and bots, because we've heard players, they're frustrated with some of these things, and we want to fix those. We want to make it better.
And we'll talk more about that later.
And we're going to go deep on that too. We're not going to go deep on this next one, but we have mentioned that we do want to close this chapter in Isabella's story, and we want to close it in a really cool way. And that's something a little further down the line that we can't wait to share with players.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, this is sort of the roadmap we've laid out, but we're always listening to what players want and adjusting. And I think we saw a little bit of that with the expertise in Gypsum, the end game changes we made. Like, we heard there was some room for improvement, and we're always open to sort of interject things into the roadmap when we hear concerns from people.
Yeah, awesome. So that's kind of the vision in the future of where we're going. We're going to spend the rest of the show deep diving on a lot of these topics with other developers who solely focus on those things. So it's going to be exciting. All right, so this next segment is going to be bugs, exploits, dupes, and bans. And we have some new people here at the table. I'm going to introduce Katie Krasinski.
Krasinski.
Did it?
Okay. I like
Krasinski.
It's like the cooler version of Katie.
John Krasinski sister.
that. I know, it's better than the Unabomber, which is the one that people usually get my last name right.
Katie Krasinski, you are the senior producer. We also have Scott Geiser, who's a gameplay engineer, and we have already introduced Rich, so we don't need to do that again. But I will ask you the first question, Rich.
Sure.
There are a lot of questions about how the ban system works within New World. You know, can you give some insight on that?
Sure. Bummer of a topic to have to cover, but
Yeah,
I
you're
understand
welcome.
people being curious about it. So there's actually multiple systems here. One is the first line of defense against particularly cheats is EAC, and then EAC is regularly updated with information that allows it to identify people that may be running unauthorized third-party cheats. That system will just automatically prevent you from playing because we can't allow you into the game if you're using those third-party cheats. And everybody should understand, if you run a third-party cheat, you're going to get banned in New World, and you won't even be allowed into the game. So that is the only aspect of that system that's automatic. There's a completely separate system that we use for sort of enforcement within the game for people, called the ban system. The ban system's a little bit mislabeled because it's also a suspension system. Sometimes if you're doing something and it's negative and it's affecting other players, but it's not really, terrible. It's just wrong. It's say you're bothering somebody, consistently in game. We need to make you understand that that's something that you can't do, like you can't harass other players. In those cases, we might often just suspend you instead and say, like, hey, you're going to get a notice. It's going to tell you why. There will be a period of time that you can't play until you stop this behavior. It's also possible to have bans that are permanent in the case of some really egregious negative thing that you do that impacts other players. The major measure there is the impact to other players. That could be the economy. It could be something about gameplay. It could be something that you're doing to basically, like throw a war or create an unfair advantage in a war. Those kind of circumstances affect many other players, and in those cases, we are going to ban you. It's a bummer to have to do, but when you're disrupting other people's gameplay to that extent. One thing we don't do is, and I know there have been reports of this, but I just want to make it clear, we don't automatically ban on reports.
Right.
Reports lead to a human investigating the case, trying to figure out what the impact was, looking at the available data, and if there's a conclusion there, like, yes, you as a player did something that was very negative that affect many other players, you might get banned, but that's not something that just happens based on volume of reports or a particularly specific report. It's always an investigation. There's never an automatic step from a player report to a ban.
Right. And a player can go back and try and appeal their ban.
Yep.
If they feel unjustly banned or something like that.
Yeah, we take each of those seriously, and I completely, we have reversed in some cases. We found that we've made mistakes. When you have humans, sometimes mistakes are made. And I completely understand how disruptive that is, and it's apologize to anybody that was affected in that way, but it's a necessary step, right? We need to be able to say, yeah, you've done something really bad that impacts the game, and we also need to listen when you say, I don't think I did the bad thing that you think I did.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there are flaws, sometimes there are issues in those kind of systems. So we do take all that feedback seriously. We investigate every case that's appealed. Many players have a different evaluation of their impact, and that can sometimes lead to disagreement, right? The player may say, I didn't do anything that affected that company when I caused them to lose a war. The other company may disagree, and we can look at the game situation and say, yes, we disagree as well. You did do something that affected that other company. So there's not always going to be a perfect resolution there.
Yeah.
But we do investigate every appeal.
Right. Okay. So how would you, Katie, this question's for you. How would you categorize how serious a penalty is.
Yeah, Rich hit the nail on the head with that one. So it is about player impact. Depending on how much a player has violated our code of conduct or terms of use, and this is again something that if it's not part of the like you used a cheat or something like that, if it's an in-game thing that players have reported, we have somebody who goes and they look at the logs and they check that to see exactly what happened, and then we make a determination from there. So it's about player impact. And again, like Rich said, sometimes you might not realize what the impact was, but we do, and we use the code of conduct as our guide.
Yeah, and we should emphasize that player impact can be sort of abstract. So say hypothetically, you had a way to log in the game and suddenly make yourself level 60. And you might, as a player, say, well, that didn't impact anybody else. Just the fact that I'm level 60 doesn't impact anybody else.
Right.
But it does, because it invalidates the accomplishments of people who work to get to their level 60
Exactly.
and earn their way there. So in that case, for instance, if that hypothetical were true, we would ban you if you had knowingly done that. If you had done that because you were deliberately trying to achieve the invalid result, we'd say, no, you've just invalidated everybody else that got to level 60, and therefore, like, you're banned.
Right.
If it happened to you by mistake, we'll correct the mistake and set you back to level 1. But luckily, there's no way to go from level 1 to 60, so it's completely hypothetical.
But also, like you brought up, there are like temporary bans, suspensions, and then like permanent bans. So is there like a level of, like, if you're a repeat offender of the same thing, does that kind of increase?
Yes, it does. So our customer support and moderation team, they're able to see the history of how often you've been reported, of the ban history or suspension history, and that is considered. So if you keep going back, even though we've slapped your hand and we've told you not to do this, if you keep going back and doing that, or you modify the behavior but you're still violating the code of conduct, then you're going to get a worse and worse penalty until eventually you're banned.
Yeah. And so the next topic is bots. I know people have been talking about bots in our game, and Scott, this question's probably for you, which is, like, if I report a bot in the game, how long does it take for that report to kind of be a meaningful impact?
So like Katie said, we keep track of all those reports. Like, we don't throw those away or anything, and they're always there to reference. What we want to be careful of is basing any like penalty action entirely on reports, because I know there have been rumors and things that players can just use reporting as a weapon against other players to ban the company leader of another company right before a war or something. We don't do that, and one of the reasons why it takes a little bit longer to get bots out of the world is because we don't just base it off of reports. We also have to take those reports and then analyze like telemetry and logs and other things to try and sort of like prove that there is botting behavior going on. And there are certain things we look for. There are indicators like thresholds of playtime or repeated activity, or things that like would be very unlikely for a player to do. But even then, it's not super trivial just from looking at that information that someone is a bot or isn't. And so, our goal is not to ban players just that are getting reported, or players that have a certain play style. There are definitely players that just run around gathering things all the time. And it would be, horrible to ban them.
Like when we were looking at gather bots, and we accidentally got some folks in companies that their whole job for their company was gathering and crafting, and because they're so good at what they do,
the honest discussion at the table was like, well, no human would ever be able to hit that,
human would
right?
do this.
And then later we're like, yep, actually, there's a few humans that can do that.
So that's one of those instances where we thought we were making the right call, and then we heard the reports, we heard the players, and we made adjustments based on that so that we could correctly identify the bots instead of just the really great gatherers.
Yeah.
And just to cap that discussion off, I mean, there are bots still, that like all MMOs, we have bots still in the world. We're never stopping going after those. And so some people might ask, well, why is this bot, like I've reported it, it's still there. Yeah. It's because we haven't gotten definitive with being able to identify that bot. But in the meantime, we've banned thousands of others, and we will eventually get to that and eliminate all of the ones that exist now, and then a new wave will come in, and we'll never stop working on that.
Yeah. The player experience seems to be, paramount when it comes to prioritizing what we work on. So how do you prioritize bugs that come in? or exploits, that type of thing?
So on my team, what we do is first when we have a report from players or even from our own QA, we have QA verify it, and we create a ticket for it that then goes out to each gameplay team or server team or engine team or the appropriate team for that issue. And then each sub-team sort of triages it themselves in terms of priority. And a lot of the times we use player impact as, why is it important to fix right now? There's only so much time in the day, there's only so many people on the team, and we have a lot of different competing priorities. So we try and make sure, like exploits and things of that nature are like the highest priority. Maybe like a misspelling or something would be a lower priority. But even in those cases, different people work on different things. So, we could, designers can fix typos or data issues. Engineers are working on, more systemic fixes to things. And it's just a matter of bandwidth and impact to customer, like what we can get the best ROI on.
There's also a component of time. Sometimes little bugs, if they go too long, like we might say like, oh, it's not a very priority, but it's just a little, it's a problem in display, for instance, on a weapon, and it's got the wrong value on it. We might say, well, that's, it's not as big a priority as the other bugs we're working on right now, but after it's been on the pile for a while, it actually kind of gets elevated. And so we take deliberate schedule time to deal with the more minor bugs that normally wouldn't be addressed in a priority scheme, because we know having them there persistently is really annoying.
Yeah. Not to get too into the weeds there, but
no, please do. If people
Into
are
the
interested, yeah, if
weeds.
people are interested in this topic.
So we also have in-game reporting, which is where we determine the impact. So how many players have reported when you go to game and submit feedback and you tell us that there's an issue. We use that to determine priority, see like what the impact is there. We also use forums. Don't tell anybody, but we use Reddit. So we listen to players to see what is impacting them, because we might think, oh, the number of reports is the impact, and so we might use that. But as we've grown since launch, we've realized that it's not just the number of reports that we get, but it's the context of the report. So something might be happening to only 100 of our players, but for them it's game breaking. That's going to make the top of our list. That's going to go all the way to the top. And I know that some things have taken a while for us to address, like the folks who can't transfer servers because of a pending or stuck contract. That's something that we are looking at every day. I'm in a meeting where we discuss our top issues, and it is always the first thing that we discuss is where are we at with that. And it's not a simple problem to solve. And so that goes back to what Rich is talking about, where there's also this component of not just impact, but time, and then also what's necessary. So because of the impact plus the amount of time it's taken, that's why it's made it to the top of our list, even though the number of players that are impacted is fairly small compared to the rest of our population. So
Okay, awesome. And so, I mean, it can be kind of a dicey thing to find an exploit, right? And you want to report it to us, but you don't want to tell everybody what the exploit is, because then it might,
Please don't.
alter the ecosystem. What is the best way for somebody to report an exploit to us?
Yeah. So the best way for reporting is right now we have forums and we have in-game feedback. But if it's something that's like really bad, or it's something where you suspect that someone's using an exploit or like a dupe or something like that, you can always message us on the forums. So anybody who has a dev or community manager tag, you can message them directly. Don't post it everywhere. And if there's another bug that you want us to fix and you post this live and everybody uses it, well, we're not going to be focusing on that bug anymore, and we're going to be all hands on deck to fix that. So we just need to make sure that we're being very careful with the way those are reported. In the meantime, our community managers are doing some cool stuff and some research to see if there's like a shadow forum situation that we can set up where people can feel safe to report without it going everywhere. So there's options there. You can report in game if you see it and you want to like point out that someone specifically is using it or where an exploit can be used. When you use that in-game reporting tool, it tells us where you're at. You don't need to provide your location. So if you use that, and we'll also see that. It's just that if it needs to be done fast, the forums are the best. I'm in the forums all the time.
Yeah. And we keep an eye on those, like Katie said, and even if it's just a message on the forum, like we take that seriously and we will prioritize it. If,
Yes.
you know, if there's a report of a dupe or an economy-breaking bug or something like that, that will get to the top of the list.
Right.
And we don't need to make a YouTube video about it, because when that happens, then suddenly everyone's doing it, or not everyone. Even in those cases, we found that it's actually a very small percentage of the population, but the impact on everyone becomes huge. And then we have to think about, rollbacks if that's possible, or we had to disable the economy when issues like that were discovered. So it's a really big negative if an exploit like that gets widely distributed.
Yeah, let's not shut down wealth transfers again.
Yeah, we have less fun than you do, actually. Just to emphasize, so the in-game reporting actually gives us a ton of context. So if you have an opportunity using the in-game reporting for exploits, it tells us where you are, it tells us what's going on in the world, so it's a good tool. The other thing that I want to mention is if you're reporting an exploit and you're not trying to be clever and reporting it after you've used it 100 times, there are no repercussions to, like, I did this once and it happened to me, that seems really odd, and reporting it. We don't, we don't ban people. We actually congratulate and thank them for doing that, because that's really valuable information for us. We have had some people, it's like, I want to report the thing that I just did 20 times that occurred. And
now that I've made absolutely sure for the 50th time.
Just to be clear, that does not make it okay. So the first time, great. Maybe you didn't notice the second time. Okay. Past that, don't try to play that game. And exploits also are a great thing to play with on the PTR, because the PTR doesn't impact the rest of the game from an economy standpoint. And so we actually encourage people, like, if you think something might be an exploit, go and test it on the PTR, and then report it to us that way, because no harm, no foul. If you're on the PTR, you're not really breaking any live server economy, so it's fine.
Still, though, if you notice an exploit on the PTR and you're checking it there, still use the hidden pathways, like message us directly, because if it is something that's happening in the live game, we don't want to broadcast that. We don't want to have to take the trade post down.
It can have domino effects.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks for your time. We have a lot more coming up to talk about New World, so stick around. For this next segment, we're going to talk a lot about the Winter Convergence event. So I have with me Mike Willett, the World Experience Lead, Rob Chesney, the Narrative Lead, and Phil Bolus, the Open World Lead. So we got a table full of leads and a lot of questions about the World Experience event. So Mike, just give us, kind of a high level, what is the Winter Convergence event?
Winter Convergence is a holiday event where we celebrate the celestial binding in Aeternum. So during the winter, the lights in the sky start to brighten because of these giant falling meteorites, or we call them gleamites, that fall to the earth. And it's a sign of the forever winter that's coming to Aeternum. And alongside that, the Winter Wanderer, who's this giant mystical yeti, also appears in winter villages across Aeternum, spreading the word of the coming forever winter, and then saying how we need to bind together to fight back against it. So coming together, bringing warmth amongst players socially, but then participating in a ton of fun activities for players of all levels.
Yes. Is this something that's going to kind of repaint the landscape of Aeternum, the lights in the sky, or is it going to be kind of centralized into one space that everyone's going to have to go to?
So the Winter Convergence takes place all across Aeternum. You'll see pockets of areas that have been kind of taken over by the forever winter. So there's going to be frozen caves that have frigid folk and bad yetis that you need to go and fight against. You'll see big changes to settlements. You'll see brand new holiday trees that you can go interact with and get presents. You can also go to the winter villages that are across Aeternum to see the Winter Wanderer, to get quests from him, to turn in tokens, to get tons of rewards that Phil's going to talk about later. So everywhere you kind of see this impact into the landscape. So it's a very fun activity that changes kind of
your perception of what happens here.
Nice.
And it's more stuff that we want to do like this in the future. It's a little bit more dynamic and fun.
Sweet.
We spare no expense in the settlements. Let me tell you, when you walk into the settlements, you're going to know it's winter.
I mean, Frigid Folk is like a great band name also. It's-
It's out there.
Yeah.
It's out there. We've got the treatments in a lot of the settlements, so it feels like the holidays upon Aeternum, and then we've also got our winter villages, which is, the winter convergence to the max, where it really feels like you're stepping into a new part of Aeternum, which is going to be really cool for players.
Yeah, and so, in the open world, maybe you can answer this. This is the first event that we're bringing to New World. It seems like, winter is just the perfect place to have that setting happen.
Yeah, I think when we look at when the game released in September, the time leading up to now, I think this was the perfect moment to release a big event in the world, and it just coincides really nicely with the holiday season where we have an opportunity to come together and spend a little bit more time playing games typically during this time. And so we really wanted to make sure we had some of that reflected in Aeternum and put our own supernatural spin on what that could be and introduce a lot of cool new stuff for players to do during this time.
Yeah, because we had Halloween come and go, and we had kind of a taste of Halloween in Aeternum with the pumpkins and things. So it seems like that on steroids. So that's gonna be pretty awesome.
I think that's putting it lightly, but yeah.
Yeah.
There was like some Christmas junkies on the team too who've been working on this. Like I was shocked to get in and like read the first documentation on the Winter Convergence event, because there was like people have been working on this for a long time.
Nice.
Like some of the earliest plans were years ago.
Yeah, and they really wanted to celebrate those differences that exist on Aeternum, where it is a jovial time, but it has this like eerie sense of darkness and a little bit of dread of like, what could happen. So everything is not as it seems on Aeternum. There's always that element of danger.
As the narrative lead, can you give us like kind of some background in like the lore of the Winter Convergence event, or kind of how it came to be?
Yeah, and I think Mike just mentioned that this idea that Aeternum is a pretty spooky, dark place. There's the corrupted and the lost, and there's just threats at every turn. And so from the beginning, we definitely knew we wanted the Winter Convergence event to be something happy and joyful, but yet it needs to be inside the spirit of what Aeternum is and what New World is. But it's also really important for us in New World that we're looking at cultures from across the world. We're not just trying to look at one culture. So we looked at what's consistent in all the different winter festivals across the world, and of course the solstice is the big thing. And so that was kind of the start of it. This talk about the convergence and the dualism and the two things coming together. And then we pulled elements from a lot of different places. The Yeti, of course, comes from Asia. We have some very familiar Christmas elements to some people, and then our winter villages are a little bit like a Christmas market, I would say. They at least had that vibe, very European.
Very European, yeah.
Yeah, and so we took all those elements, and in terms of like the backstory inside what the Winter Wanderer is about, is this idea that every year there's this threat of winter coming, and it's possible that the forever winter would come. It's like a winter that would last a really long time, if not forever. And the Winter Wanderer is a figure that shows up that rallies people to bring happiness and joy and cheer and giving and generosity and community spirit, to help ward off this threat that can come. There's also this sort of there's a backstory to the character of the Winter Wanderer that we're only hinting at right now. So there's kind of more to come to be revealed about him, and how he became who he is, and his relationship to the other Yetis, because of course there's a history there.
Right, so we'll probably see more in the future of some new events and ways they're all tying in together. So I'm sure you think about that constantly as the narrative lead.
Well, yeah, and I think too, the winter event, I imagine over the years we'll evolve it. We're going to be adding certainly new features to it and stuff like that, and so the story will evolve a little bit as well.
So you'll see, more of the story, but activities will increase. Like right now, a lot of the stuff you do is finding lost presents, crafting things for your territory. It could be like toys and gifts to level up the tree at the center of your town, which will then give you even better presents and rewards. So the more activities that you do, the more that builds up that rep. Then you also have an opportunity to go into the shop and get even better rewards.
Nice. great segue because I have a question for you, Phil.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the rewards? Like, what can players expect when they jump in and engage with all this Winter Convergence event stuff?
For sure. There's a lot to discuss here, I think. We've really chalked this event full of unique and exclusive rewards. So throughout the duration of the event, by doing the activities around the event, players can earn tokens, and they can use those special event tokens in our winter shop. And in the shop, they'll be able to get exclusive furnishings and decorations for their house, including animal ice sculptures, which are really neat. Yeah,
That's cool.
And we've got exclusive new sets of armor, as well as new sets of weapon. They have like a really nice, awesome-looking Frozen theme. And at the top end, we're also giving players a skin that is inspired by what the Winter Wanderer is wearing. So it's this nice like fur flowing cloak that you can get. It's really cool. Nice. As well as a house pet, which is a toy rabbit, and an emote, an exclusive emote themed to the event itself.
Like a frigid, you're cold
Yes.
emote.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then on top of that, you can also get patterns. And patterns is a new item that we're introducing too in our December release, where players can use that. And a pattern is a crafting recipe, a one-time use crafting recipe that will emulate the exact appearance of an item, but allows the crafter to craft that at whatever level they're capable of, and add and control their perks with the perk mods, and really control the recipe and build their own types of unique armor sets with this specific visual. So those will be available in the Winter Shop, as well as very rare drops from interacting with the Tree of Light.
Oh, okay, that's
And
cool.
so depending on the crafting prowess, you'll be able to craft super high gear score versions of the armor and the weapons that you can earn in the shop too. So for the crafters out there, you're gonna wanna make sure you got your crafting gear and your trophies all ready to rock for this event. 'Cause
Nice.
It's gonna pay off.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's safe to assume that like the things that are happening, the things you get in during the event, they're obviously going to carry over once the event ends.
Correct. Yep, everything will carry over. The window to earn it is only through the event, but everything you earn is going to stick around in Aeternum for forever.
What would it be if you couldn't keep your Christmas presents?
Right? Yeah, take them away at the end of Christmas.
It would be forever winter, Rob.
Forever
No, that's
winter.
right.
Terrible.
That's exactly it.
Young Greg, when he gets his Christmas present, there is a 50% chance that it's broken by the end of Christmas Day. So I would usually lose about half of my Christmas presents.
You drop them on the floor. I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So that's why you buy digital presents that way.
Oh, boy. So Greg,
Yeah.
one more addition actually, because there's even more to talk about with the rewards.
Yeah.
We're also introducing ways that players can increase their expertise in December, and through the event, they do that through crafting gypsum casts and earning different colors of a new material we've introduced called gypsum. And we have a special event gypsum. So by interacting with the Tree of Light every day, level 60 players can earn diamond gypsum. And that gypsum, if you interact with 3 trees, is enough to earn a gypsum orb and craft an item that'll be a guaranteed increase to an expertise of your choosing. So there's a lot to just dig in here. Also, sorry, one other thing.
Yeah.
And wait, there's
And
one
wait,
more.
there's more.
In the very bottom of the stocking.
Right in the very, very bottom of the stocking, when you for all players, when you interact with the Tree of Light in the settlements, you'll get a special lockbox the first 3 times that you interact with it per day, and that lockbox will have a coin reward and some silver, so that it'll be a really good way for players to earn a little extra money. This in-game currency, for this
That's
season.
awesome. I mean, it sounds like the Winter Convergence event just like is like chock full of new lore and creatures and visuals and things that everybody can jump into. So I'm really excited about it. I know a lot of the players out there are excited to jump in. So thanks for joining us, guys, and giving us a look into the Winter Convergence event.
You bet.
Yeah, no, thanks.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, and for this next segment, we're going to be talking about a new feature coming to New World, Mutators. And so I'm joined again by Mike, Rob, and Charles. So if you want to just kick it off, Mike, what are Mutators and how do they work?
So mutators are augments to AI, elite AI, and named AI in expeditions.
Yeah.
NAI. So they're augments to the AI, and they're on a weekly schedule and cadence, and they go through different rotations, and they're presented as challenges to the player. And they're a great way to test out your gear, your power level, and to increase your power level. So every week you take on a new expedition with a new set of mutations and challenges. So you'll go sign up with the board, you go up with your group, you enter. You'll see the challenges before you actually enter. So you'll see what the week's challenges are, so you can better equip your gear, your consumables, and prep yourself to do several runs. And so expect to play this upcoming. It's something that we think is going to be super fun for a lot of our hardcore PvEers,
Right.
Because every single type of mutation presents a new and unique challenge. So as you're going through it, you might get shocked where certain enemies just start exploding, or they start leaving like areas of effect that you need to now navigate around, and you might be presented with different curses or different things that impact your core abilities that you weren't ready for before.
Yeah.
So we think it adds a unique twist to the formula and makes things really challenging and rewarding when you can complete them.
Yeah. So it's like it's taking, the things that you're familiar with, adding these mutators on top of it. So it's basically like new content to the game that you can understand, and it's just making things different. Is that?
Yeah. It's a different type of variation of content. So when you're going into it, one way that you expected to play against an enemy is going to change completely by the way that you interact with it. So it'll have different affixes, different types of curses, and what we call promotions. And each week there'll be a new combination of those things to challenge yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, and each of our expeditions has a different enemy family in it, right? You got the corrupted in one, you got the angry earth in another one, and then when you get into the mutators, they're going to behave, and they're going to have bonuses that are different than what they normally have. So it's going to really change up the whole combat dynamic in each expedition. I mean, I think that's accurate.
So it's primarily about expeditions, but what about like invasions and outpost rush? Are mutators going to make their way into shaking things up in those?
So that's something that we're currently exploring. And so when we run the PTR that's upcoming in January and we run mutations, we're going to get a lot of great feedback from that, and we're going to see how that applies to going to an even larger scale.
Okay. And so are there rewards? Are there Charles, are there different rewards that come from doing something that has a mutator on it or mutations?
Yes, absolutely. Each of the dungeon or each of the expeditions, there's a whole new unique set of rewards for every single expedition that goes with mutators, and some sort of rotating rewards as well, depending on what the mutations are. So we really wanted these challenges for players to feel really rewarding, not just in the content itself, but in the visuals that you get from that. So there's a bunch of new unique sets with really cool visuals that I'm super excited for players to see, that'll just feel like when you've accomplished these different challenges, you can show that off in town and be able to really demonstrate your sort of accomplishment over these things.
Do you have one that's your favorite?
Oh man.
Again, it's picking your favorite child,
yeah, I know.
right?
That's tough. I think what's most exciting for me is we've been able to take a lot of the core visual styles from each of these families, the corrupted or the lost, etc., and really amp them up to a new level for these outfits, for the rewards for players. So there's a lot of really cool, unique looks that'll feel different than the stuff that's in the game now, and lets us artistically express kind of where we think the game could go visually. So I'm pretty excited about that.
I think tying into those rewards, it should be said there's 10 difficulty levels each time that you run one of these expedition mutations, for the week. So what you're trying to do is climb up that ladder, and it's going to challenge your gear and your level. And so every time you pass a certain score threshold, you unlock the next mutation level. And so it starts increasing in difficulty every single time that you jump up. So sometimes you're going to be able to punch above your weight, and other times it's going to become very difficult, and it's going to take a lot more coordination and planning to start to get up towards that level 10 mark.
Right.
And so we expect players to coordinate well, get their gear in line, and every single time that you run it, you're going to get rewards, but you're trying to keep climbing the ladder because the reward pool gets bigger and it gets better and it becomes a guaranteed way to increase your power level.
Got it. And
Is it true that do some of the drops and some of the mutators, aren't they like more effective in other ones? Like, do they help you for the other ones?
Absolutely. It just depends on what the combination is, because there's going to be some things where you're going to need more fire resistance,
Right.
or you're going to need to do more ice damage. And so depending on what week it is and what expedition you're running, you're going to have to, adjust to that. And so, yeah, some of those will feed into those other activities, which could be useful in other activities that you do, whether it's in PvP or Outpost Rush or any of the other game modes. Because you're like, oh, this person is wearing this type of gear. I'm going to challenge that by, equipping stuff that's like maybe more heavy and elemental or void damage.
Okay, I think I grok mutators now. But you mentioned keys. Is there like you have to like kind of grind to get these keys?
So unlike our vanilla expeditions, the keys here are universal. So once you have a mutation key, you can use it in any mutation. And because we want players to run these more frequently, they're going to be more freely available. And so during the PTR, we're going to figure out, hey, what is like the right amount that you should be carrying at any given time, and where do we think players are going to be like climbing the ladder. So we'll make adjustments in tuning based off of that. But our goal is to have this as repeatable like every day.
Yeah. Awesome.
Multiple times every day.
Yeah, and so you were just touching on like when we might see this. Rob?
January.
January?
Yeah, you'll see it on PTR in January, and then it's coming up soon, the release. It kind of depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously jumping into the PTR for everybody out there is like intrinsically valuable for us, right? So jump into the PTR, give us feedback on, all of these new features, things you discover. But yeah.
We need to say it's public test realm. I think we do.
Yeah,
Some people.
PTR, the public
test realm.
Yes. And what was AI again?
Artificial intelligence.
Got it.
But see, I think that's confusing to people too, because like some people, I think, well, the gamers mostly know that AI is enemies. But
NPCs.
Yes.
We have our
Well,
whole
NPCs
host.
It's an
friendly.
object that's been scripted to do things.
Yes.
to hurt you.
Yes, based on what you do. Yeah.
See, I think of NPCs as being good guys. Like it comes from a quest and a narrative guy. So
Yeah.
That's because you tell the NPC what to say.
that's right. I mean, yeah, but they're nice. Like bad AI.
That's because you're a nice person.
They're not. Well,
There it is.
I think that too. So yeah.
Right.
Anyway, play in the PTR. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to have the rotations accelerated so you can participate in more and see how high up the ladder you can climb.
Yeah. Right on. Thanks, guys. I think everyone's going to be really excited about the mutators and how they're going to change up the game. All right, so for this next segment, we are going to be talking about kind of our February release, how we're focusing on balancing the game a little bit more. We are joined by Dave Hall, who is the player experience lead. So Dave, kind of at a high level, how do you determine whether a weapon might be overpowered?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a lot of different tools that we use on this. We look at the forums. We obviously have our internal play tests. We have our expert players. We also look at how the wars and outpost rush modes are going and what weapons are being used. For instance, in a war, if 40 out of the 50 people are using an ice gauntlet, there's probably a reason they're trying to use
Right.
the ice gauntlet.
Right.
So we need to kind of look into that and what is being done to, what are they doing to cause this OP-ness, as we like to say. And so I think it goes into a lot of different things, and in the end, it comes down to, for me, is this experience that's happening to the other players feel bad, right? Like, is what this ice gauntlet doing to the other team something they can't counteract? Is it something they don't like to play against? Is it making the game experience worse? And do they feel bad that they're not using that weapon? And do they want to switch now to go to that weapon? And those are things that really start to hone us in on, like, hey, this might be something wrong with this weapon, and let's take a closer look.
And on the reverse side, right, we're talking about overpowered weapons. There's players who are talking about the fire staff and maybe the ice gauntlet being underpowered. Do you agree, or?
I think they're in a really close place. There was some pretty significant changes to them recently, and I know those weren't super well received, but they're a lot closer to the other weapons than they used to be. We are looking at a few things in the very near future that are going to amp them up just a little more. In particular for the fire staff, we're looking at the fire mage side of the tree to do some little bit buffs in there. And the ice gauntlet, we're making sure to add a little more CC in because we think we accidentally nerfed a little too far in their CC abilities.
Right.
So.
Now, when we're going to use the PTR for a lot of this, right? Like, hopefully these things will be discovered on internal playtests, through the QA team and what have you. But when something a big change goes to the PTR, we'll be looking for player feedback, about overpowered or underpowered weapons. How do you take that feedback and ingest it, to make changes?
Yeah, we have to do it very quickly, first of all. And so we take a lot of the feedback, and we actually sit in all-day meetings, all the combat designers, and we just sit around and we talk about everything in there, and we rise everything up to the top that we think is the highest priority. We look at the feasibility of the change. How long do we think it will take? Is it an easy change? Is it just a data change? Or is it a complete rework of the ability? Those obviously will affect how we're going to approach the issues that people are seeing.
Mm-hmm. So this could be for you, Scott. When you decide to implement like a new perk instead of balancing, or it could be for anybody, when you implement a new perk instead of balancing the old ones, is there a science or a method to that?
I think part of it is just our team capacity and who's working on different high priority things. If there's a lot of high priority bugs, then we might have more or less engineering support on a particular thing, and it might be more designers able to address things. So part of it comes down to who's able to do the work in sort of the time frame we need. In some cases, it means that we already have the tech and we can make new changes or even adjust existing things depending on a case-by-case basis. But that's probably the biggest thing, sort of like what resources can we commit to fixing a particular thing?
Yeah, I think that instead of saying like why did we focus on creating new ones versus this, it's not a versus. These things happen at the same time.
Right.
And so there is a resource part of this, which is if we don't have the resource that is supposed to be working on the new content, if they're needed on fixing old ones, that's where we're going to put them. We're going to put them on the fixing. Mm-hmm. But most of the time we can work on both of these things at the same time. It's just fixes aren't always easy.
Right.
And so it's going to seem like we're focusing on new content or new perks versus doing bug fixes, but we're not. These things are happening at the same time. It's just the level at which we can get them complete.
Yeah.
That's what changes.
Yeah.
So.
And sometimes you'll see people, in the forums or on Reddit or what have you, saying like, why not just buff all of the weapons until they're the same level instead of nerfing particular ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with our weapons, we do want them all to be around the same level, obviously. And for a lot of our updates, we have been buffing unused abilities or upgrades that aren't getting usage. But some of the overpowered ones, we just had to bring back down into a little bit of a tighter control, because otherwise it just kind of escalates to a point where at some point none of the enemies will be tough for you anymore, right? Like they're just
and who wants that?
Yeah, you want a little bit of challenge.
Who wants none of the enemies being tough?
You want challenge in the game.
Yeah.
And I think so. We want to try to keep it in a bracketed place, and I think with anything that's not being used, we're always looking at how can we make them better for the player. We want diversity in our builds. We don't want everybody using the same tree. We don't want everybody using the same 3 abilities. So we want to make sure that's occurring for all our weapons.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like this is an ever-evolving process. Where we collect feedback from the players, test, iterate, that it's going to continue to happen. It's not just like one thing's going to end it all.
Absolutely. We're going to be doing this for the entirety of the project. And I think one important thing to remember is that this is the beginning of the lifespan. And in the beginning, there are a lot of little shifts that kind of need to happen. This is the first time we've had so many people playing
growing
this.
pains, yeah.
A little bit of growing there. And so there's been some larger changes than we would like to normally do. But they had to be done, and so I think we're getting to a place where the changes will be a little more subtle,
right,
and a little easier for people to understand.
And in terms of growing pains, I know that some people are complaining about bots in Outpost Rush. Mm-hmm. Scott, do you have any info on that?
Yeah, so that's definitely a concern. Outpost Rush is like one of the most engaging like level 60 experiences that players can engage in, and so when there's a bot or like an AFK player or someone just taking up a slot to try and grind rewards, that really hurts one side or the other, whichever side is they're on. And so we're doing a lot of different things in that regard. We're doing analytics and telemetry to try and identify players. We shortened the AFK thresholds for Outpost Rush because that's supposed to be like an active type of experience. We're also changing the scoring system a little bit. This is announced in the December patch notes, but we're going to make it so that the assist kill contribution works a little bit differently than it does in the open world. In the open world, you want to favor the player, and if someone's in your group and you kill something, you want them to still get experience and loot and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But in Outpost Rush, we sort of put you into these groups during the game mode, and then it didn't really jive with like our vision for that mode, that you'd be off to one side not engaging in PvP, and then you'd be getting all these assists. And that was one of the things that was contributing to the score and allowing these bots to basically do nothing but still get a chest reward. So we're approaching it from a lot of different angles.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And speaking of patch notes, Katie, I know this is something that comes up a lot in the community when they feel like there's something that has been left out of the patch notes, that it might have been done intentionally. Can you talk a little bit about how the team puts together patch notes?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, gonna throw ourselves under the bus a little bit, that we never intentionally miss items from the patch notes, but there's a lot of changes, and the difference between what we did in alpha and beta and what we're doing now is we're providing more structure, and we're really focusing on how to get the best out of our patch notes and ensure that we haven't missed anything. But it's been a really tough process because, for instance, when we do a monthly release, that first set of changes that we start looking at, there's tens of thousands of them. Right. And sometimes it's difficult to keep track of those. So we're constantly looking for ways to do better with that. But I just want to make it very clear that there's not an instance that we are like, let's just leave that off. Let's not tell the players about this one. That doesn't help us. We want to tell players like what has changed, what's new in the build, what's different, because we want you to go in and give us feedback. That's a critical piece of our development cycle, is getting player feedback. And if there's something that we want to call your attention to, we're going to do it. And unfortunately, we've had some misses in the past for sure.
And all the changes that go into our game, like there's a variety of them, like art changes, there's tweaks of different numbers and variables. Then there's like more systemic like code changes and changes to systems. And so even for one particular player-facing change, like to modify like a fast travel system or something, there might be 6 different check-ins that all change one thing, or there might be like one change that actually modifies like 12 things that the player will see. So translating like the changes that the team members are making into like a bullet point list of like, this is what the player will see, can be challenging. And then also the way we sometimes rely on like maybe engineers or other people that are very focused on their work, and like, I'm changing this number from X to Y, but
they don't understand the player impact.
Yeah. There's a lot of player impact. That might alter the loot rolls of every single chest in the game, right?
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of work that we can do to improve that workflow.
It may seem like it's a simple thing, but it is very complex. Right. And my dad always said that complex problems have simple, easy to understand, wrong solutions. And that's where we have definitively landed with the patch notes. But it is something that we're working on and we're trying to do better. We want to make ourselves like the gold standard of this, and we're falling short of that at this time. So it's a priority for my team in particular.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like, right now, January, February is really all about fixing process, the balancing of things in the game, the continued polish, bug fixes, things like that. So it sounds like we have a lot of really like, maybe not crazy flashy things happening right now, but like under the hood, in really important things.
Definitely.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this segment. And we will have more coming up next. All right, so this next segment is going to be all about weapons in New World. And both of these gentlemen are heavily involved in how the weapons work, adding new weapons, tweaking the weapons we currently have. So this question would be for you, Dave. What do you think about when you are coming up with a new weapon, or what weapon should be introduced next?
There's a couple things. I think first, we always want to introduce weapons that bring new play styles to the game, right? Like, so something that really changes up the gameplay. like with the Void Gauntlet, our most recently introduced weapon, we really wanted to bring in this idea of debuffing and sort of a counter to some healing, and debuffing as a different play style. So definitely look in with each weapon to bring in something new that changes up gameplay. The second thing we look at is sort of trying to fill gaps, right? Like we heard loud and clear from healers, hey, what do I use with my life staff? And I think the Void Gauntlet was like a complement to that. Like those two weapons pair really well together. So also just trying to fill gaps like that.
Okay, and speaking of like weapons kind of pairing together, can you talk about the blunderbuss and how it might be different from the musket?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah.
So the blunderbuss, a really exciting new weapon we'll be coming out with pretty soon here, and it's when you think of the musket, it's a little more of a strategic weapon. It's a longer range, a little lower rate of fire, all those type of things. But when you get to the blunderbuss, you're going to think more excitement, more explosion, a little more chaotic, I would call it. There's some navigational tools on it, which are really exciting, and a little more of a run and gun style. So a definite difference in pace for this one in comparison to the musket. And it's going to be a little more short to mid-range, and also I think it's going to pair really, really nicely with some melee weapons. So. And maybe even some staffs. So it's going to be an interesting weapon that has a lot of different uses.
Okay. Is that a hint on what it scales based on?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that yet.
All right. Speaking of weapons that are heavily requested and talked about by the community, the Greatsword. Can you tell me anything about it?
We are working on a Greatsword. I think we've heard it. I think it's going to be an awesome weapon. We talked about wanting to change up gameplay with each weapon. I don't want to give away too much yet about the Greatsword, but I think it'll have this concept of stance switching and like having different modes within the weapon that I think will be really special and bring something new to the table.
Okay. I mean, that sounds great because people are knocking down our doors for that Greatsword. Another thing people are also asking a lot about is daggers. Is that something coming down the road, or?
You know, daggers are definitely a crowd favorite. We have a lot of different weapons on our table that we're looking at to make after the Greatsword. And I think it's definitely at the table. I don't think it's
a big table.
It's a pretty large table with a lot of different weapons on it. And I think it's one that is near the front, but it's not quite there yet.
Okay. I'll take that as an answer. And another one of the last questions that we see just asked constantly is, when can I use a shield and another single-handed weapon?
That one hasn't made the table yet. And I just want to be a little.
That one's still outside knocking on the door?
It's trying to get a seat at the table, and it's something we really want to do, but it's actually a really large endeavor for us to accomplish this. And we want to focus on filling in the other play spaces with the other weapons first before we go over to that area.
Okay, all right. So it's knocking on the door, but we hear the feedback.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think we wouldn't do. Like, it's going to take us a while to really build out a system where you could flexibly interchange weapons like that. But like creating another weapon that does pair with the shield, sort of like sword and shield, like making a specific pairing, is something that is not on the table yet, so to speak, but
Right.
but could be sooner.
Okay. Do you have a favorite weapon pairing, or has it changed since since you started designing the game a while ago?
I was a big great axe hammer sword user, so. But that recently the meta is shifting a little bit, which is cool in a game. So looking for my new pairing now.
Yeah, I always run sword and shield and great axe, and added in the warhammer and great axe, and now I'm actually doing warhammer and arrow. I just like the bow and arrow now. So
We watch like a ton of streams. A lot of content creators. We play in game with all these folks. Has there been anything that like surprised you in the way people are pairing weapons or kind of their build?
Maybe not a pairing, but one of the things that I loved was some of the creative uses of the Ice Gauntlet, like the sneak up PvP moves, like we see people hiding behind a bush and like see a big PvP mob come in, and then they like jump out of the bush and put Blizzard and all these things on and sort of like melt the whole group. That was super cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I really enjoyed was people just playing around and making their own paladin build. That was something we actually had not really thought about when we were making all these updates to our weapons and everything. And when we first saw it, I was like, this is amazing. It might have been a little overpowered for the people playing against it, so we might have made a little changes there. But overall, we just love the fact that people can kind of go in there and make their own class. And I think that's just an amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, what's been really cool, like having worked on New World for so long, like the game now belongs to everybody else, right? And we're kind of just witnessing how they're engaging with it. Before it's been, kind of theory crafting and wondering how people are going to use the game at scale. So it's fascinating to watch. And I think that's going to motivate, future tweaks and balances and improvements.
Yeah, for sure. I love like checking the web and like finding better builds
Right.
For weapons that I've worked on. It's like, wow, they thought of something I didn't. Like, it's super cool.
It's amazing. I love watching the streamers, and especially the PvP streamers, and watching how they how their new tactics are evolving every day. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, well, thanks for joining us. Next, we are going to be talking about endgame content. So in this next segment, like I said, we're going to be talking about endgame content. We have Dave and Phil both here to talk about this. I think one of the big things that the community is asking about, and it's kind of a hot topic right now, is why did you decide to remove the high watermark system?
Well, I think there were some improvements we wanted to make is how I would classify it. And I think the two big things I think of is one, the high watermark system was completely random, so players had no control over it. And with the gypsum system, players can do activities and then get gypsum and choose which cast they craft, right? So if you want to increase your sword, you can do that. You have some control over it. And that's really important because sometimes you just get unlucky with rolls. Mm-hmm. And if you have a weapon or a piece of gear you really want to advance, not being able to could be sort of devastating. So that was one big thing. The other thing is we just wanted more variety of activities, mm-hmm. right? Like with the old system, it really rewarded named enemies, right? And almost too much. It was too inefficient of a path. And so everyone just did that, and they missed all this other cool endgame content we have. So with the different gypsums, all the different activities, you have incentives to do everything. You can do corrupted breaches, you can do all the different activities, expeditions, arenas, which I think is some of the most fun and difficult content in the game that no one's really doing. So we really wanted to bring people to all the content we have made.
Sure.
On top of that, too, I think it's worth noting that we're no longer calling it the high watermark system. We're calling it expertise, because that's really what it is. You're raising your level of expertise on each weapon or type of item that you can equip in the game. And another big thing, too, that we've done to help give it a lot more structure, and one of the, I think the big misses that we had when we initially rolled it out is it was invisible to players. So now, when you go into your paper doll, you can see, what is your level of expertise per every item that you have equipped. Also, when you do get a bump now in your expertise, you get a nice notification that pops up on screen, this big, beautiful banner that lets you know just what you got and what it affected, and it feels great. I love it now. It's like after you loot a chest or kill an expedition boss, and you get like that item that raises your expertise up, you get this nice toast, and it just feels like you just got stronger. It's really cool now.
Nice. That's great. There's another question that keeps kind of arising is why downscaling gear instead of raising the gear score to a new cap?
That's a good question. Well, when we looked at players' progression along the expertise system, we did see that very, very few people had actually maxed out their expertise, and we wanted to address that portion before even attempting to raise the gear score. So with the gypsum system and surfacing the expertise now to players, we're giving, as Dave mentioned, a lot more control to players to start to grow and progress on that path and have it feel more tangible to them as they do it. The other thing too is when we do raise our gear score, we want to attach that to some good meaty content. We don't just want to raise it just because, if that makes sense. We want to make sure that there's a reason that you need to get to, above 600 gear score now to go attack some larger threats in the game.
Yeah. How do you see these changes affecting crafters?
I think what we want for crafters is for them to be able to participate, but in their own way, right? Like we don't want to have to force them into activities. And what crafters most want to do is craft, right? Like they love gathering the materials and then developing their skills, the trophies, the potions, their gear set to really maximize crafting. So what we want to do is give them a path towards that. So any crafted gear will never be downscaled or affected by expertise. So it's an alternative path to get towards end game gear, because we know these people invest a lot of time and effort in getting that. So we want them to have a viable path.
Yeah, and make sure that still feels rewarding. Another thing we're doing too, we're adding a new reward type as well along with the system. And as players battle in these our end game zones, they can acquire a new type of item called a timeless shard, and these will be either armor or weapon shards. And when they're crafted, what they'll provide, they basically act as an artifact recipe. So it's a one-time use craft, but with that craft, players will have a guaranteed attribute. So you get a timeless bow shard as an example that would have a fixed dexterity attribute. And then you can also control what perk you put on that with the perk mods during crafting. So there's a lot more control that those items are going to give crafters in pursuit of that perfect rolled item.
Right.
Yeah.
And are those pretty rare, Phil? Can you sell them when you get them?
They are pretty rare. But I think, if you run the elite zones enough and you're doing the end game content, you should come across them frequently enough. And can you sell them?
Yeah,
of course you can. Of course you can.
What I like about our crafting system is that anyone can engage in it if they want, but we also don't force it, right? So what's cool is if I'm not a crafter and I get one of these timeless shards, it's sort of like hitting a little mini jackpot, right? Like I know I can go to the trading post and sell this thing to a crafter who's really going to want it.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. So going back to the gypsums a little bit, why aren't all gypsums the same? And why does it take more time to create something with one type of gypsum over another?
That's a good question. So the different activities that Dave mentioned, and doing things like running expeditions, opening elite chests, killing bosses or elite named enemies, right? Participating in Outpost Rush. A lot of different in crafting and closing max level corruption breaches in the world. All these things will give you different colors of gypsum. And then the recipes, they require different amounts of gypsum because some of those activities are much more easy to accomplish than others.
Right.
So you might have to open 3 elite, have to get a good roll out of 3 elite chests versus getting a good roll off of killing more elite named enemies or things like that. And then, things like Expedition and Outpost Rush that take a little bit longer of your time you'd have to do less of those to be able to craft a gypsum cast.
Okay.
And we got a super interesting 8th gypsum that we recently added with the Winter Convergence event. We wanted to just keep increasing the rewards based on feedback we saw in the PTR, and also give something for endgame players to do. So we've now introduced Diamond Gypsum into the Winter Convergence event, and so that'll be an 8th way you can get a cast, which I think people will really enjoy.
Nice. So there are people who think that expeditions aren't worth their time and effort, and they're just not doing them. Do you agree?
Well, no, I think there really is some truth to that to a level, and we've been working hard to try to address a lot of that. With this update, I think that expeditions become a really great source for leveling your expertise. In an expedition, you get a guaranteed random expertise drop when you defeat an expedition boss. You're also going to be opening elite chests, which have the possibility to reward you with obsidian gypsum. And you also get specific gypsum from doing the expedition itself. So if you're completing these dungeon runs, that gives you almost 3 opportunities per the time invested in that dungeon that expedition run to increase your expertise. So pretty rewarding.
And timeless shards will really come from expeditions, right? That's one of the main sources.
That's one of the main sources for timeless weapon and item shards for sure.
Nice. Earlier in the show, we talked a lot about the mutators. How do you see the mutators affecting the end game?
A lot.
Okay.
So Phil said, we don't want to increase gear score until we have new meaningful content that brings hard challenges. And I'm sure, as Mike said, mutators are hard, really hard. So this is going to be a time where we increase the gear score because you're going to need it to deal with the difficulty 10 mutators. So we're not going too much into the details yet, but as you do mutators, you're going to be getting a new resource that you can use to upgrade specific weapons. And you'll need to sort of do that as you're ranking up in the difficulty chain on mutators. You'll have to keep increasing your gear a little bit to sort of keep up with the more difficult enemies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds awesome. I'm really excited about these changes, guys.
They're going to be great. I'm super excited. I'm really excited for our players to like just get in there and start feeling the power. I think it's just really palpable now when you get in there and you start earning your expertise bumps and you start getting those good rolls and crafting your gypsum. Like it all feels really rewarding. So I'm really excited for people to experience it.
All right, great. Thanks for sitting down and talking about Endgame with us. And we'll move on to the next segment. All right, and for this next segment, we're going to be really diving into quests and lore within New World. So we got Mike back, Rob, and Charles in the seats. So this one might be for you, Rob. There have been some changes to the main story quests since launch. Are we planning to continue that trend?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're working on our quest tools all the time, and we're improving like what we can do in quests, the way we implement quests, like to make them more fun, more impactful. And so we've been prototyping all of our new tech in the main story, and we're adding these even to quests that are already live. So destructible, objects that you can destroy as part of a quest, new sort of traversal puzzles in some of the main story quests, and wave event encounters, which is something we didn't have before. So all those are going into the main story quest, and then of course, we're also going to be finishing up this chapter, this first chapter of the main story soon. So that's pretty exciting. Definitely a lot of work going into that. And we're going to continue, possibly updating these quests when we find ways to do it, or we see that, hey, players aren't as engaged with these quests as we'd like them to be.
It sounds like, early on people were complaining that quests can be too repetitive and some parts of the world don't actually have enough quests in them. It sounds like these are some of the answers to that line of thought.
Well, yeah, because we're continuing to add new quests. So we're in addition to the main story, we're adding new quests to some of the territories. We're putting NPCs out in the wild with new storylines and and new dynamics, frankly, that we didn't have in the game before. We're also working on some new quest lines that are associated with trade skills and weapon skills. Super excited because those I think bring a different flavor to the experience that they'll run throughout, from early on in the experience to the end.
Yeah.
And then kind of touch on what Rob was talking about with some of the updates to the quests. Charles and I have been working really closely with our zone teams to ensure we're updating the art in POI. So you'll start to see more of the themes of corruption and a withered lost and bile and just different elements start to tell more of the environmental story that's helping accentuate and uplift a lot of the stories that they're trying to tell on the lore side. So whether it's the interactions, and sometimes we've wholesale moved POIs and rebuilt things in order to tell better parts of the story.
Yeah, a lot of that is the presentation of some of those events too, making sure that this narrative was there, but we weren't really highlighting it, and so now making sure it's getting the love it needs to express that narrative in a good way.
Yeah.
Nice. So some players have expressed frustration with the quest flow and the travel times to get between quests, or how are we addressing stuff like that, Mike?
So we're taking a multi-pronged approach to addressing a lot of those things. So first thing you notice, and I believe this was in the November release, is you run faster on roads. So that's another little boost that you get to players that are just traveling along all the normal pathways and roads in Aeternum. Second thing is we're starting to add some additional spirit shrines closer to some expeditions. That's so once unlocked, you're going to be able to get to certain expeditions a lot faster than you previously had been before. Additionally, we're cutting out the modifier for distance traveled, reducing the cost for distance specifically for fast traveling from settlement to shrine or vice versa. So that cost will get reduced, so you'll be saving a lot more Azoth. And then what was the last one, Rob?
We're also revealing them on the map ahead of time, so you can see where they are and go find the spirit shrines. I mean, before you could follow the column in the sky, but this kind of makes it a little bit easier for you to identify them on the map and then head over there to unlock it and hopefully make it easier to get around the world.
And then additionally, with a lot of the new quests that we're doing, we're having the NPC follow along with you. So a lot of
Oh,
times
okay.
it's going to be shorter distances traveled, and then also you're going to have turn-ins in the next sequence of quests closer by for a lot of the new content that we're exploring.
Nice.
Putting the NPCs out near the situation they're going to send you to instead of they're way back in the settlement sending you.
Right.
Yeah, and you can see
Way-
some of that with the Varangian Knights.
Yeah.
And that like adds to like the dynamic feel of the world. You're going out and like, oh, coming across these other adventures and sort of having these little experiences that feel more natural.
Yeah. So going back to the lore and the narrative, so far it feels like Aeternum has a lot more questions than answers. Even as we, are going to start to wrap up storylines, is the mystery behind Aeternum going to remain, a through line as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the fact that this island is this mysterious source of legend and myth for all the world's cultures is kind of the core idea of what it is. And so there's folk stories and superstitions that are associated with this, and that's something we want to play with for the life of the product. And I think it's something that I guess what I want to mention is that there's another aspect with the enemy families, with the corrupted and the lost and the angry earth, where the dynamics between those and the history and how they relate to the ancients, one of the big mysteries about who the ancients were and where they came from and where they went. There's a lot of story there that we want to reveal over time, but we've charted it out, and it's something that we're super excited to explore.
So it does sound like we're going to kind of wrap up Isabella's tale, maybe Thorpe's tale. Are there going to be new major characters coming in to the mix?
Definitely. We haven't seen the last of them yet. They're
Okay.
iconic characters. So,
Right.
we'll, even when we wrap up this chapter of the main story, rest assured those guys are going to be back. But we'll be introducing new characters too. We've definitely, I think, been brainstorming a lot on like different kinds of characters and, historical people and other sort of mythological figures that we could bring into the story going forward. So I'm excited about that stuff.
Yeah. I was going to say for me, like the aesthetically and narratively, like digging into this history, looking at myths and legends from all these other cultures, there's so much like interesting story to tell, and it ties into our setting really nicely. Sort of brings a lot of like different culture and visual variety, and like the kinds of stories we can tell are very different as we go area to area and as we add new zones. So I think that's pretty exciting.
I like this aspect where we're in this place where nothing really dies, and on a long enough timeline, who's really good, who's really evil, and do those roles change over millennia. It's very interesting to see that dynamic and how it plays out in different situations.
Yeah. So you were touching on bringing in new cultures and kind of the art style of that. And I know your impetus has a lot of how the biomes look and how players travel within those things. Do those things intersect, like the art and the how players move through the space? They're connected extremely close?
Absolutely. You can't have one without the other. I mean, you have visual storytelling and the needs of the player, and then they're not too different than, I guess, how humans react with things. Like how we observe something, we speculate about it, and then we engage with it. And so you want things to feel like they're rooted and they're familiar, yet they're different in a way that's intriguing and engaging. And we look for those opportunities to, create some of those juxtapositions,
Right.
and make you think and put you at wonder. I mean, some of the vistas that Charles and his team have created are, gorgeous.
Right.
So it's like we want to keep building upon the structure that they've already laid down.
I was going to add, like, every time we're thinking about a new space or a new area or a new zone, it's definitely something we've been talking about a lot, is like, what's the core dynamics here? How can the environment like change the way you approach a space? So players have to like sort of alter their mindset, like, oh, I'm in this zone, so I need to deal with and think about these things that I didn't have to think about in that other zone because this environment's different. There's something different here that I kind of have to contend with. I think we want to lean into that more environmental stuff that just affects how you approach the game and sort of what you're doing in that zone.
Yeah, definitely want to take advantage of the growing set of utilities that we're giving the player and how that interacts with the places that we create.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the new spaces we're working on are pretty dramatically different from what you've seen in the game so far.
Right.
Like, not just in terms of like the way they look, but in the dynamics that you're talking about and like the stories that we're telling in them. And then we're also really working hard, I think, in all of our different disciplines on creating more discoverable stuff, like things that players just happen onto, whether that's a character, a quest, or like a little mystery that's embedded in the environment. Like a lot more of that stuff is getting added, I think, as we go forward. And it's like I'm super excited to see more players finding that stuff. Like they found the the ghost ship that appeared off the coast. And we're looking forward to doing more stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like there's a ton of exciting stuff to look forward to for the players, both from a narrative perspective, from a world zone perspective, new enemy types coming in. So you'll see all of that in the future. And we'll all check it out together. That was a haul. We got through a lot, and I just want to say thank you to anyone and everyone that made it to the end of this video. All of these questions we pulled from the forums, from social, they all came from the community. So I really hope that you found it informative and that some of the things you were wondering about you now have answers to. And we gave you a little bit of a look at what's coming in the future, what we're doing behind the scenes. So thank you.
Yeah, we just appreciate the feedback. We are so excited to answer questions and do this. As a matter of fact, if we hear from the community that this was beneficial and you like this, we'll be happy to do it again.
Yeah.
I did want to comment that we also heard you loud and clear that you wanted to see the devs do a run through Merkguard. We did it. We'll be releasing it in a few days.
How'd you do?
So we were way under geared. So our gear
Here
was
it-
509.
here
We
it
should have been
comes.
around 570. And my disclaimer is our PEX lead was in Tampa Bay watching Buffalo
Classic.
lose that close game. So we lost our best player. But we held in there a little bit, so we'll let you all judge how we did.
Yeah, the world will get to judge. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye.